All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to I guess I'm calling this the Missouri Wing Pilot Roundtable. Uh, we have, I've got 0902, so I'm a couple of minutes late. We're going to get started. Um, if you are not a panelist, I do ask that you turn your cameras off, hopefully save us a little bit of bandwidth. And I will start with some introductions. We have Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Stone. His background includes 20 years as a FAA DPE, 6 years as an FAA FISDO ASI, Aviation Safety Inspector. He's flown over 100 different makes and models of GA airplanes. Additionally, he was a captain and FAA check airman at Trans World Airlines and American Airlines. Has flown 5 different transport jets, including narrow body and wide body planes. All total, he has about 27,850 hours. I'm pretty sure that just means he stopped counting when he got that high and ran out of fingers and toes.
Yeah.
He holds several types ratings and FAA certificates, including private, commercial, instrument, airline, transport pilot, and a few not so common FAA certificates like aircraft dispatcher, air traffic controller, flight engineer, aircraft and power plant mechanic, ground instructor. And in 2015, he was selected to receive the FAA Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award. We also have
Wow.
we also have Lieutenant Colonel Keith Monteith. He was a Cap Cadet who used that experience to go to the U.S. Air Force Academy. After graduating from the Academy with the private pilot's license in gliders, which I'm always pro glider, he was selected for pilot training, and after getting his wings, flew F-16 Charlies for the next 14 years and 2,400 hours. Spent several years in Germany, and later was the AWACS Vice Wing Commander in Oklahoma City, flying the Boeing Echo 3B/Charlie AWACS, and commanded an expeditionary wing for Afghanistan with U-2 Dragon Ladies, RQ-4 Global Hawks, and KC-10 tankers under his command. His last assignment was in the Pentagon as the HQ Air Force Deputy Director for Space Operations, retiring as a colonel after 28 plus years. He then worked for Boeing Phantom Works for 10 years and L3 Harris for 5.5 years before retiring in 2022. Major Blake McCall started flying when he was 15 and obtained his private certificate at 17. He attended Indiana State University and obtained an Air Force pilot slot through ROTC. His first assignment was flying the KC-10 extender and worked his way up to instructor pilot in the KC-10. He's currently a C-40 instructor pilot at Scott Air Force Base, flying high-ranking members of government and diplomatic VIPs all over the world. He holds an ATP certificate and is also rated in single and multi-engine seaplanes, gliders, and certified aircraft dispatcher. Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Katja Van Horn is a student at ATP Flight School in downtown Kansas City. She earned her private pilot's license in 2021 at age 17 and now holds instrument, commercial, and flight instructor ratings in single-engine land aircraft. Concurrent with her training at ATP, she works for Midwest Avionics at Lee Summit Municipal Airport and recently secured a position as a flight instructor for Summit Flight Academy. Long-term, her goal is to be a corporate pilot flying the Embraer Phenom 300. A lover of all things aviation, she holds a private glider rating and soloed one of CAP's 2 hot air balloons at the Johnson Flight Academy during the summer of 2022. So she may actually have a few things she's flown that Colonel Stone has not flown. Captain Chris Adamo is currently a major in the Missouri Air National Guard, flying C-130H2s, as well as a new United Airlines 737 first officer. He started his career in AFROTC, where he commissioned into active duty Air Force as a pilot. His first flying assignment was the C-146A DO-326 under AFSOC and deployed 5 times around the world. After 6 years, he transferred to the U-28, where he deployed once before transferring to the Guard. Captain Dan Stratman. Captain Dan Stratman is an author with multiple #1 best-selling military aviation thriller novels on Amazon. He's also, which by the way, I had to pay an overdue fee because I borrowed one from the library and I failed to return it. So he owes me a nickel. He's also a retired major airline captain with over 40 years of experience in the aviation industry and has over 15,000 flight hours. Before flying for the airlines, he was a decorated Air Force pilot. In addition, Captain Stratman is a highly sought after aviation consultant, media aviation spokesperson, and a former NASA astronaut applicant. He is a world traveler, having been to 43 countries so far. Unfortunately, we had one other panelist who was supposed to join us. She is under the weather today, so she's not able to. So our best wishes goes out to Cadet Colonel Reagan Hess. Hopefully she will be able to do this the next time we plan on doing it. Yours truly is Captain Sam Somersinger. I am the Missouri Wing Director of Operations, and I will be serving as your moderator today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us all, and thank you very much to our panelists for being willing to serve on today's panel. And I hope that there's a lot of information and education that everybody gets. A couple of housekeeping things. If you are not a panelist, please turn your video and your microphones off or turn it to mute. Send any questions through the chat. I will either respond to them through the chat or address them to the panel. In the top right corner of your screen, you should see a little box with 4 squares. If you click on that, it will let you change your view. I recommend switching to probably speaker view. That way, whoever's talking is going to fill up most of your screen. And with that, I think we will go ahead and get started. And I don't see any questions in the chat, so I will start off with a question that I put together. And start with you, Colonel Stone. Why did you decide to get into aviation?
Well, actually, that goes back to when I was just a kid. My dad was a career Air Force, and so I was always around airplanes. And when we weren't having school, I'd go to work with him at Seward Air Force Base in near Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where his assignment was. And when he was working, I'd walk down to the flight line and I'd watch C-119, just going to date me a little bit. Some of the older guys will know what I'm talking about. C-119 boxcars, which was eventually replaced with the A model C-130. And that bird is still flying today, and pretty impressive machine. But having been always around airplanes and military, plus my brother, retired Army colonel, helicopter pilot, it just seemed like a natural fit that I would go that way. However, as the fate turned out, I did not get to go in the military. I'll answer that question later if it comes up as to why. I actually wound up going the civilian path and becoming a commercial airline pilot.
All right. Thank you, sir. Major McCall?
Yep. Actually had to do a class kind of a presentation on a career day when I was in middle school, and drew careers out of a hat. I drew pilot, and the more I researched it, the more I thought, man, that sounds like a pretty cool job to do. So I think that year my parents got me a discovery flight at the local airport, and when I did it, I was like, yep, that's what I want to do. So they're like, well, get a job and figure out how to pay for it. So did that, and then when I got to college, my dad mentioned, he's like, why don't you try doing the Air Force route? And, you know, they'll pay for all your training. I assumed every Air Force pilot was a electrical astronautical engineer or something. And I was like, that's not me. Like, I don't have an engineering background. He's like, well, you never know until you try, and just go talk to him and ask. So I did. And they're like, nope, we'll take you. So I did ROTC, got a pilot slot out of that. And then that's pretty much how I got started.
All right. Captain Stratman?
Well, I was one of those kids that always loved anything to do with airplanes. And my dad was a civilian pilot. At one time, we had our own airplane, so flew quite a bit with him. And when I was a senior in high school, I went to a Catholic high school here in Kansas City. We had a nun who was our guidance counselor. she dragged me into her office and said, "Hey, Mr. Stratman, what are you going to do with your life?" And I, typical senior, 18 years old, I said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, think about things you like, and let's start from there." And I said, "Well, I like airplanes." So she got out her big book and we started going through different aviation careers, aircraft mechanic, air traffic controller, airline pilot. I said, "Go back to that one. Let's check out that one." And so she laid out all the steps necessary for me to become an airline pilot, with the civilian route and the military route. And that was it. She changed my life. I jumped on that path to the military pilot career, and spent 7 years in the Air Force during the 80s. And the idea was to get out and go to the airlines. I flew a very old airplane as my first assignment called a T-33 Shooting Star. And then I went to the C-141 cargo plane, flew that all over the world, which was perfect training for the airlines. And then joined Northwest Airlines, flew with Northwest for 20 years. Delta bought Northwest, flew with them for 6 years. And then, like Sam mentioned at the beginning, I've done consulting in courts, aviation expert. I've done national media interviews. Once I retired from the airlines, I started writing, and now I write aviation and military aviation thriller novels. With all the cool experiences I've had over my 40 plus years as a pilot, gives me a lot of material to draw from. Another cool thing is the research for my books. I've gone to a handful of different Air Force bases in the last year and a half for research for a book. I'm going to Edwards Air Force Base next month to do research on being a test pilot. So I turned out, ended up with my dream career, and couldn't be happier with how my life turned out.
All right. Thank you. Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Van Horn.
Well, I think I took my first general aviation flight when I was about 11 or 12. And at that point, I said, wow, this is the coolest thing I have ever done. And this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So got my first job when I was 14, paid for those flight lessons. Eventually got my private pilot certificate and decided to go to ATP flight school in downtown. And now I'm a flight instructor, just kind of starting out on my aviation journey.
Thank you. Captain Adamo.
Yeah, so I first got bit by the aviation bug as a child. My dad had his private license, so he took me up a couple of times, and then he kind of got out of it. But going through school, I was always like looking up at the sky at the airplanes flying by and stuff, so it kind of always kept that bug there. In high school, I did Naval JROTC. I was able to go fly 2 or 3 times during that, which just solidified it. Applied for an RTC scholarship. Air Force accepted me, and through college, I flew when I could, bumming out at the local airports. Got accepted into a glider program with RTC over the summer, so I flew the TG-10Bs out at the academy for 2 weeks, which we actually now fly here at CAT, which is kind of cool. And then was accepted as a pilot and went to pilot training. So went through the training and then got selected for a C-146, which is a civilian Dornier 328 that we use for transport in the military. With that, it just became sky's the limit. I saw 53 different countries with it, deploying a whole bunch of times, and have just kind of progressively changed aircraft since then. And now I'm with United. And ironically, I've seen more of the U.S. with United in 1 year than I did with the Dornier in 5.5 years, 6 years. So that's an interesting concept.
All right, thank you. And last but not least, Lieutenant Colonel Monteith.
Well, as Sam pointed out, I started out in Civil Air Patrol as a cadet, and there were 4 of my buddies from high school that were all cadets with me. So we were all, some of our dads had military backgrounds. My dad was Air Force. Several friends were either Air Force or Army. And of the five of us, four of us went into the Air Force. One went to transports after pilot training. He retired as a two-star. Another went the C-130 route, became a test pilot for the Air Force, and then later became a test pilot for Lockheed Martin, still doing that. Third went to transports as well. He's wound up flying for United Airlines, and I chose to go the fighter route, being an adrenaline junkie coming out of the Air Force Academy. So we kind of all had an aviation / Air Force background to some degree, or military background, and liked what we saw. And like I said, I'm somewhat of an adrenaline junkie. I like going fast. So when I wasn't flying, I was trying to race go-karts and then sports cars. But, so the F-15 was kind of in my blood.
All right. Thank you. Once again, I would like to thank everybody on our panel for serving this morning and giving up their Saturday morning. And thank you everybody else for joining us. Haven't got any questions in the chat yet, so if you haven't found that box, it's click the word chat down at the bottom. Go ahead and type them in, and I will pass them on to the panel. All right, Colonel Monteith, we'll start with you on this next question. What would you consider the most difficult training that you've done so far?
Actually, going through the Air Force Fighter Weapons School was the most challenging flight training I think there is. Everybody's seen the movie Top Gun, or most have. The Air Force Fighter Weapons School is like Top Gun on steroids, because it takes 3 times as long, you fly 5 times as much, and pretty much every other ride is an elimination ride. So you got to pass them all, and you start out doing basic fighter maneuvers, 1 versus 1, 1 versus 2, and then to 2v2s, and then working up to the multi-ship, where you're doing 4 aircraft against 8, and 4 aircraft versus more than that. For the graduation exercise, they call it mission employment phase. That's where the Air Force trains their instructors, who are the weapons instructors for the other instructor pilots. So once you're an instructor pilot, the best of those get chosen to go to the Air Force Fighter Weapons School and go through that program. So really, that's the most intense, the most difficult training that I had to go through.
Okay, I think there's a follow-up question for that. What FWIC class or equipment?
I was in the F-15C, and that was class 84 AIN. So right after my first assignment back then, I had 850 hours after 3.5 years flying the F-15 in Germany.
All right, thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Stone.
Well, for me, it went all the way back to about 1968. That's when I got hired with the airlines, Trans World Airlines at that time. However, just prior to that, in 1960, Howard Hughes, of course, owned TWA at that time. And prior to 1960, they were all Pistons. The Super Constellation was the big bird at TWA, which most of you are familiar with. And then Howard Hughes was introduced by Boeing, a new jet called the Boeing 707. So Howard Hughes decided he was going to transition to the airline to all jet. So he began to retire the Super Constellations and began to fly the 4-engine 707. And so it just kind of migrated from there, 707s to Convair 880. Probably most people don't know what a Convair 880 is, but it just looks like about a 4/5 size Boeing 707. And then, of course, the big truck of the airline, which lasted many years, was the Boeing 727. Also flew the DC-9, MD-80, and probably the most difficult part of all of my training on all of the airplanes when I was offered captain upgrade. And back in the late 60s and early 70s, the policy was up or out, which meant if you failed to upgrade to captain, you did not have a job at TWA anymore. So tremendous amount of stress to go through that program. And I was fortunate enough to pass the program and and continued to fly captain, and eventually selected to be an FAA check airman to train and check out other first officers and captains, and really enjoyed my career at TWA, and then the last few years American.
Major McCall, what was your most difficult training that you've done so far?
I'd say initial Air Force pilot training was probably the most difficult. Although I highly recommend going in, I had my commercial and instrument already, and I pretty much recommend anyone wanting to go that route to definitely have at least your private done. It made it a lot easier. When I went through, it didn't matter what license or anything you had. Everyone had to go through initial flight screening, which you go up to Pueblo, Colorado, and fly Diamond DA-20s. And sitting in the class, I'm like, all right, I know how a propeller works. I know how ailerons work and all that. But I kind of stopped and looked around and noticed that they were going through the material extremely fast. And I look around at everyone else in the class frantically jotting down notes and everything. And at the end of the class, at least 5 of them came up to me and were like, we need you to help us because he went so fast and I have no clue what he's talking about. So, and a lot of people said, honestly, we flew that whole time and we really didn't know what exactly we were doing. So definitely having flight experience before going to pilot training was really beneficial, but it was definitely the hardest thing I ever did. One day you'll be doing instrument lessons, and then the next day they go, hey, you're doing your first formation flight. And that was probably the steepest learning curve because I'd never flown formation before. So as far as civilian ratings, in my mind, the private and instrument were the hardest, and the ratings got progressively easier the further I went. I'd say the ATP was one of my easiest check rides, and my type rating for my 7.3 as well was probably one of my easiest check rides. But I think it's, as you go along, you get more experience and you kind of start to know what you're doing. So they just kind of progressively get easier. But that's my opinion.
All right. Thank you. Captain Stratman.
I'd have to agree. Air Force pilot training was the most challenging thing I've done. It was also the most fun. It's a combination of both. Like fellow just mentioned, it's kind of like drinking out of a fire hose. It starts the day you get there and ends the day you leave, and it's up to you to sink or swim. The first month, I think we just did academics. You do aerodynamics, supersonic aerodynamics, aerospace physiology, navigation, on and on and on, parachute landing falls. And then at that time, back in the 80s, I flew the T-37 was the first airplane I flew that for 5-6 months, then the T-38. And T-37 washed out a handful of people, and then the T-38 washed out a handful of people. Basically, the problem with the T-38 is that you have to think faster than the jet, and it's extremely fast jet. We had 77 people that started in our class, and only 44 graduated, and that was pretty typical. I'm not relating this story because I don't think most of you out there can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. You just have to realize it's going to be a lot of pressure from day one. I was at a pilot training base in Texas, actually the same one I went to last summer doing research at Laughlin Air Force Base. And I asked the flight surgeon the reasons that kids are washing out of pilot training. She said, one of the reasons is they just can't handle the pressure. Back when I went through, it was like being thrown into the deep end of a pool saying, hey, we'll see you in 12 months. Hope you survive. It's not anywhere near that bad now, but just realize that you'll be held to pretty high standards. I think 85% is the minimum passing grade on any test you take. So I thought pilot training was probably the most challenging thing I've done.
Captain Dama.
Yeah, I'm going to mimic the Air Force pilot training. Starts with when I went through IFS, introductory flight screening. Now it's the introductory flight training, IFT. So it's a little bit different now. But the very first day we were sitting in this big auditorium, and our flight commander was like, I'm not here to teach you how to fly a plane. I'm not teaching you to anything about it. I'm here to wash you out to save the Air Force money. That was the introduction to that course. And that's that's pretty much what happened with it. They went through, the whole goal of it at the time was just to get your solo done. So they got you just confident enough to get into a plane and fly by yourself in the pattern. And we lost, I think out of my flight, there were 28 of us and only 22 passed. And they were running 8 flights at one time. And we were actually one of the better flights for people passing. You then go to, actual pilot training, UPT, and it's kind of the same thing. You do the academics, min passing of 85 on any test, and it's like a 2-strike thing. You can fail one, you fail your second one, and then you're at the review board. Flights were kind of the same thing. You get what's called 88 rides and 89 rides. And once you've blown through those, if you fail again, you're out. So we lost quite a number in my UPT class. But the biggest thing I think that made it hard was you get that fire hose effect. They're teaching you all these different things, but then it's, how do I describe it? You meet failure. For a lot of guys, you meet failure for the first time. I went through high school and kind of succeeded at most things that I did. Through college, it's the same way. I had a mathematics degree and was a 4.0. Usually if I applied for something, I got it. And then it wasn't until Air Force pilot training did I start failing at things, failing rides and hook to check ride. And a lot of guys up to that point, it's the same thing. And that's where you kind of learn how to deal with failure, and you either get better from it or you kind of go down a rabbit hole and you never get better from it, which I think is good. You need to, in flying, there's a lot of failure that you do. You make a lot of mistakes, but you need to be able to get past the mistakes and move on. So, yeah.
All right. And Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Van Horn?
Well, I'm not an Air Force pilot, so my experience is a little different, but I would definitely agree with what Mr. McCall said about private training probably being one of the most difficult trainings you do as a civilian pilot getting into aviation, just because it's so different from anything you've ever done, right? You've never flown a plane before, and now you're flying the plane, you're landing the plane, doing these different maneuvers. Also the knowledge, right? Although it's not particularly deep, like the knowledge you would have required for private training, it's a mile wide. It truly is. You need to know navigation systems, regulations, lots of different things, and it's a lot of different skills. Because this, for some people, in high school, college, you get told what to do, you get handed your homework assignment, whereas in a lot of aviation training, you're responsible for your own knowledge and doing your own studying and making sure you have knowledge of the information.
All right. Thank you. And I'll start with you, Miss Van Horn. What are your future goals in aviation?
Oh, wow. Well, definitely, I want to be a corporate pilot. So what exactly that's going to look like, I don't know. The Embraer Phenom is one of my favorite private jet aircraft. But basically, I like to fly planes, and that's what makes me happy. So right now, I'm a flight instructor. I like to glide, but pretty much anything flying airplanes, I'll be content with.
All right. Captain Damo?
Yeah, as long as I'm flying, I'm happy. I'm building an aircraft right now, Sopwith Camel. That's probably going to lead into more, aircraft projects. Eventually, with United getting into a wide body fleet, start doing more international flying is usually the goal for most guys. And then just keep in the cockpit, fly with Cap, fly any chance I get, and eventually get my instructor rating as well.
Lieutenant Colonel Monteith?
Well, at this point, since I've flown most of my career, biggest goals now is just continue flying my Cardinal RG and flying Civil Air Patrol. I enjoy flying cadets. I enjoy doing the search and rescue mission. I've been on a couple. And I enjoy really working with all of my squadron members.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Stone.
I apologize if my dog is barking in the background. He's going a little nuts here. If he does, I'll let you move on to someone else.
Sure.
But anyway, my path was very much like Cadet Van Horn. I was civilian instructor at age 18, 19, and thought at one time maybe corporate pilot, and then airlines were expanding rapidly into the jet age, and they just could not they'd sucked up all of the extremely well qualified military pilots like our panelist here. So they began to turn to look and see what was out there for general aviation. And I was a flight instructor, had about 1,500 hours, which was not very much, but they were desperate, and they took us on board there. So I will say to Cadet Van Horn, I hope you enjoy instructing. I was one of those nerdy 19-year-olds that really enjoyed teaching. Most 19-year-old flight instructors are there just building time, or a lot of them are building time and just move on to a corporate or an airline job. But because of my love of teaching and instructing, I think that led me into some positions to teach at the airline, to be selected as a check airman, a DPE, and things like that. So I'd never felt like I really had a job, because when I go to work, I really look forward to going to work, and it just was the best thing ever for me. So I feel blessed and very happy, and had a long, successful career. I'm probably the oldest member on the panel. I'll be 78 this year, and still flying for CAP and one of Sam's instructors and check airmen, IPs. So I feel very fortunate to be able to give back. Thank you.
Captain Strapman.
Well, I'm really enjoying putting all my years of flying to use writing books. I'm going to continue doing that. I have a number of other ideas in mind. And I've had so many readers contact me and say, you got to make movies out of these books. And I said, well, I don't live in Hollywood. So I'm out of luck on that. I'm just starting to kind of look into that world of adapting my books into movies. So that'll be a big challenge. If anybody here has lunch with Steven Spielberg in the near future, just kind of drop my name in the conversation. I'd appreciate it.
All right, Major McCall.
Oh, sorry. I was actually reading through some of the questions in the chat and forget what the original question was. What was that again?
What are your future goals at this point?
Oh, that's right. Future goals. Yep. So I'm out of the Air Force in August of this year. That's the end of my pilot training commitment that I owe the Air Force. So I've kind of been putting my resume together, getting all my apps in line. The girlfriend and I are kind of sitting down, having conversations of where we want to be, in 5 years, and what kind of work, life, and relationship balance we want to have in the near future. So I'm kind of been looking at everything, filling out the airline apps, and I've even got a couple contacts for some corporate gigs in Indianapolis that said they'd love to have me. So just kind of talking through that with her. It's kind of, really what she wants. So I'm kind of been the person I could live anywhere and do anything. So it doesn't really matter to me. It's kind of up to her what she wants, how much she wants me around or how much she wants me gone, either way. So, but
right.
I was looking in the chat. It looks like you had a question. What was it? Oh, do you think more people wash out from their lack of flying or academic skills? I can say in my class, we did have someone wash out because of failing 3 the academic tests. I think it was once you fail 3, you're out type deal. I think he just didn't really prioritize studying for those tests versus other things. For anyone going to pilot training, the best thing I can say is just take it one step at a time. You'll show up and you will get literally one of those cardboard boxes that reams of paper come in, and it's full of binders. And I remember looking at it and I was just like, I don't even know where to start with this. And someone told me, it was like, just start on the first packet read that, take that test, and then move on to the next one. So with that guy, he was, trying to speed through the startup sequence of the T6, and we still have, 4 more academic tests before we even start flying. So he kind of didn't prioritize that. And then we really didn't have a lot of guys washing out due to lack of flying skills. Besides the academic washout, most of ours were people that decided being a pilot wasn't for them and they wanted to go pursue different career aspirations. So, yeah, it's like Straven said, if I can do it, pretty much anyone can do it. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to kind of run back through some of the questions we got in the chat, and we'll get back. We'll start with you, Captain Stratman. I think Major McCall, you already answered one of this, so I'm going to kind of merge a couple. One is, do you think more people wash out from lack of flying or academic skill? And somewhat related to that is, if you had failures or setbacks, what helped you work through that or bounce back, as opposed to those folks who washed out? So, Captain Stratman.
From what I remember, it was kind of evenly split, academics, T-37s, T-38s. Of course, as you go from the T-37 to T-38, you go a lot faster if you can't mentally keep up with the airplane. That got a lot of guys. I just forgot the second half of your question. What was it?
If you personally had any failures or setbacks in your aviation career,
sure.
What helped you bounce back?
Yeah. What I did, I kind of got my stubbornness up and my temper up as I, wait a minute, if I did poorly on a test or did poorly on a ride, I'd kind of get mad at myself and say, look, I can do better than that. I'd buckle down and really double up on my studying or chair fly or sit in the sim or something like that. Just really take responsibility for myself, saying, tens and tens of thousands of people have been through this program before. I can do this. It's up to me to do it. And just kind of fell back on my stubborn side, I guess you'd say, and say, I'm going to do whatever it takes to pass this program.
Cadet Van Horn, have you had any failures, setbacks in your short career, and how did you bounce back? And have you seen people wash out yet for lack of flying or academic skills?
Yes, definitely. I think I've definitely had a lot of failures, a lot of setbacks, but flying is a learning experience, right? And it's a learned skill. So I think it's something that most people, if you really apply yourself, you can succeed, right? And as far as coming back from failures, it's all about your mindset. Flying is a mind game, right? Something that I learned a lot about in CFI training actually is how your mindset affects your learning, right? So maybe you have a flight that didn't go as planned. I've had a lot of those, but you got to ask yourself, did I learn something, right? If you learn something, that's a valuable experience that you learn from, right? We can learn from our mistakes when we make them. And if you didn't hurt yourself or break an airplane along the way, you can come back from that. And as long as you continue to put in effort, it will probably work out just fine.
All right, Captain Damo.
Yeah, kind of like what everybody else said. It's a mindset. I often joke, man, I wonder if that landing's still thinking about me like I'm thinking about it. It probably isn't, but I'm still thinking about it. But another thing that I did, especially with UPT, was I had a good group of teammates that I worked with, and we all hung out together. We studied together. So if we had a failure, you had teammates there that were helping you get through as well. And sometimes in UPT that's a little rare because it's you against everybody else trying to get fighter slots and things like that. But sometimes it's adjusting the expectations, but having other people there to talk through different things, different ways to do things, was probably always my biggest help with dealing with the failures and things like that you'll get. As far as the washout question, we had more people through IFS washout. They're just, they weren't studying properly, or it just didn't click with them. And then once we got to UPT, the only guys that failed out of the academics were the people who didn't want to be there, because for whatever reason, the Air Force, it's better to have failed out of the program than to quit the program. So you'd see some guys who realized, hey, I just don't like this. I kind of don't want to be a pilot. They would, what I call soft failed. Usually the flight commander would take them back, like, hey man, do you even want to be here? And they'd be like, no, not really. They're like, okay, well, we'll get you out faster. So then they would just hook them pretty quickly and they'd be gone. Most everybody who had a good attitude and wanted it and studied and prioritized and was receptive to any feedback, they got them through. And I know that's still the case today. Like, they'll get you through, they'll teach you what you need to teach. And as long as you're receptive and open, you'll do fine.
Lieutenant Colonel Monteith, how have you bounced back from failures or setbacks, and what do you see on the washout standpoint?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about pilot training, and I pretty much echo what everybody else has said. The bottom line is you go back, try and figure out what mistakes you made, what you could learn from them, and how you can show that on your next flight or next event that you're not repeating the same mistake. You're willing to move forward. Toughest ride I had was, for instance, I was up for one of the LM rides in fighter weapons school, where you're going out 1v1 against the chief of the school, who's got thousands of hours at 15 time, and you've got to beat it. So, that obviously there's more than a lot of pressure on that, because washing out of fighter weapons school is not the same thing as washing out of pilot training. You'll still be flying a jet, but there's a lot of embarrassment associated with going back to a unit when you can't graduate from the premier instructor school in the Air Force. So a little bit of pressure there, but the bottom line is you try and learn from your mistakes and not repeat them, and then move forward. Learn from other people's mistakes.
Lieutenant Colonel Stone. All right, I guess we'll move on. All right, Major McCall. Let's see, one piece of advice that an instructor has given you that you still use today.
Ooh. Let's see. Man, that one I'd have to think on. Piece of advice an instructor gave me.
Don't be ashamed to go around.
I would say, yeah, can always go around. I would say there's one. It was a military instructor, so the exact phrase isn't appropriate for me to say here, but it was kind of like, don't focus on one small thing in the cockpit, look at the whole picture, look outside the airplane. And I guess it was kind of a scenario you kind of had to be there for, but I was, focusing on one little small thing. I think it was during air refueling as a receiver, and he goes, man, you're focusing on one small thing on the other airplane. He goes, step back, look at the whole airplane, that you're sitting behind. And pretty much doing that, I got in a much more stable platform to get gas from the tanker when I was behind him. But I think the phrase, because it was funny, that's kind of stuck with me, and that's the only thing I can think of right now. But I think it's something I'll come back to you.
All right, Captain Stratman, one piece of advice that an instructor had given you that you still use today.
I think the best piece of advice I've ever gotten from instructors: don't let your ego get you killed. The aviation world, about 30 years ago, a lot of the different players in the aviation world got together and tried to figure out, why are we still crashing airplanes? We've solved so many different issues, and yet we're still crashing perfectly good airplanes. And they came up with the CRM concept, the philosophy, crew resource management or cockpit resource management. And to really just boil it down, what they found in a lot of accidents was that the pilots had same type of personalities, very arrogant, egotistical, stubborn, wouldn't listen to anybody, and their egos were more important to them than admitting that they'd made a mistake. And I really took that message to heart. That's just ingrained in every aspect of the airline world nowadays. But 30 years ago, it was a revolutionary concept, and the military has adopted it. I don't think there's any areas of aviation that haven't seen the truth in that and the value in that. So I think that's the best piece of advice I've ever gotten. Don't let your ego get you killed.
All right. Cadet Van Horn?
I'd say probably a good piece of advice for flying is just look outside. It sounds obvious, but a lot of times there's a lot going on inside the cockpit that tends to distract us when a lot of our primary visual references should be outside of the aircraft. That's something that I struggled with going from the 6-pack to the G1000. I know we have G1000s in most of the CAP aircraft. It's really easy to see that big flashy screen and get distracted, but really if you have a student do a steep turn looking inside versus looking outside, the one looking outside is going to be better every single time. So just look outside the airplane.
All right. Captain Damo?
Yeah, to the first one, I still think of every day. Push forward, trees get bigger. Pull back, trees get smaller. And if you pull back too much, trees get bigger again. But then the more important one is don't spend the next 5 miles thinking about the last 50 miles. Which say, if you constantly focus on what you just did, you're going to get behind the jet and you're going to miss the next 5 miles and just keep getting more and more behind the aircraft. So what happened, look forward and plan for the next 5 miles.
Lieutenant Colonel Monteith?
Can't really think of any one specific lesson. I think like our cadet just talked about, keeping your head outside the cockpit, and trying to think 5 miles ahead of the airplane, so that you have as few surprises as possible. Flying the F-15 was, the things you learn there was, the airplane's a very easy airplane to fly. The challenge is fighting with it. So you have to integrate everything from the radar to visual lookout to what you hear on the radio, to what your radar warning receiver is saying, and then trying to interpret what your adversary is doing. And the same thing's true, just flying general aviation, flying a single engine Cessna 172, you're trying to figure out what the weather is doing, what people that aren't necessarily showing up on ADS-B might be doing, trying to interpret what's going on in the traffic pattern before you get to a visual field, a pilot control field, so that there's, again, no surprises.
Okay. And Lieutenant Colonel Stone, one piece of advice that instructor has given you that you still use today.
Well, the same advice I give to people giving, if I'm giving a check ride and they stumble a little bit on one particular item, they tend to focus and dwell on that. And of course, that really affects them. So I tell them same thing that Damo said, just put it behind you and move on. Let's look at everything else, especially if you're doing a certification ride with the FAA. If you do fail an item or an item's unsatisfactory, you're there, you've paid for the examiner's time, you might as well go ahead and see if you can get as many boxes checked off there, and then maybe come back and just have to repeat that one short field landing or something like that. So try to put it behind. It's difficult a lot of times. If you're 40, 50 hour private pilot, they just can't seem to get past it, and it just wrecks the rest of their flight check. So I always tell them, even in the briefing, I tell them, look, if you have a little difficulty and you stumble a little bit, forget it. Just move on. Just continue to do your best, and we'll give you credit for 98% of the flight test. Come back, do that one short field takeoff and landing, and you're good to go. So that's my advice.
All right.
Cool.
And I'd say let's take a 5-minute break now. We've been going at it for about 45 minutes. Hopefully everybody's been enjoying what we've been hearing so far. So let's get back here. I've got 9:50 on my watch. Call it 5 minutes. We'll be back 9:55. Thank you. All right, and we are back. All right, we're going to take a question from the chat next. There was a question asked about working on ratings. Is it better to work through, I guess, traditional training through local FBO would mean kind of maybe a Part 61 or Part 141, take your time, versus accelerated training, which a lot of flight schools are offering these days. So I'll throw the question open to our panel. What's your opinion on accelerated training versus what do you consider traditional training?
Having done both, I would definitely say it depends on your goals. So if you're just wanting to kind of test the waters, get your private pilot's license, see how you like flying, maybe if you're still in school or college, I think maybe a 61 provider is going to be more flexible and maybe beneficial. And they do offer you a lot more freedom as far as like things you're going to be allowed to do through that school. So for example, as a private student pilot, we were flying and landing on grass runways, right? That's something you're not going to do at bigger flight schools, right? Now, if you're maybe planning a career change, something like an accelerated, 9-10 month program might be better, right? Because while it's very intense and very expensive, you're going to be able to get it done in a short amount of time. And something about these accelerated programs is, and some people don't like them, which is fair, but they offer a lot of structure and professionalism. So they offer you a lot more resources as far as like videos and syllabus and resources for you as a student.
Thank you. Any other opinions?
Just quickly, I think speaking, if you have the goal of becoming a airline pilot, the quicker you can get those ratings and apply and get the job, and the job opportunity today is the best to spend in all of aviation history. Better than when I got hired in 1968, which I thought it'll never get better than this. But and the reason I say that is the airline career and promotion is based on the seniority number. So when you graduate from an airline flight or get hired, you get a seniority number, kind of like a membership number, and you live with that number all through your progression there. As people come off the top, you move up. Obviously, the goal is to be number one on the seniority list someday. And the advantages there are that you get your choice of airplane schedule, and everything. So it's unlike the military. The military is merit based. Unfortunately, the airline system, and I think it's because of the pilot unions, is seniority based. Got nothing to do with merit. So you're offered to go to captain upgrade when your number comes up. When enough people come off the top of the list and retire, then your number comes up, you get offered to go. So the quicker you can get the number, the better.
Captain Adamo, I think you and I had talked a couple of weeks ago about seeing younger and younger captains out there in the airlines. I think that's somewhat related.
Yeah. It just depends on timing. Timing is key in a lot of things in the aviation industry. It's definitely key. If you want to go commercial, if you want to fly for United or American or Delta, the accelerated programs, I think, are your best bet. They're a little bit more expensive, but they get you your hours faster. They get you your certifications faster to get you to that airline for that seniority number. Military, I would say I would go probably FBO, save the money, do it at a slower pace, make sure that you're fully understanding the material, making sure that, you get different perspectives from some of those guys. I know a lot of the flight academies have 19, 20, 21-year-old guys and girls teaching you, but in FBO, you could have somebody who's 70, 80-year-old and he's flown for all United or the military, so you can kind of get a different background there. Otherwise, whatever works. If the accelerated program isn't working for you, go for an FBO. Find an instructor that works. Don't be afraid to find a different instructor. It's another key lesson.
Let's see. What tools did you use while you were studying? Software, tips, tricks? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll jump on it. As far as, obviously, again, I'm not in the Air Force, but something I found really useful is for each rating that I do, I go into ForeFlight and there's an area you can create binders, right? So every rating I do, instrument, I make a binder, I put in anything relevant to my instrument rating, right? So I can put a digital copy of the instrument flying handbook, my airplane POH, anything related to that rating. And that's been really helpful for me, that you can just have all of your resources that you're going to need in one spot, downloaded, easily accessible.
I would also say, in addition to that ForeFlight app is probably the best safety tool and the best device in my 50 years of flying. There are other similar like ForeFlight, but I love ForeFlight. And if you're a cap pilot, you know that they give you that, what is it, $300 or $400 subscription for free. And it's an amazing device that you can do almost everything from filing a flight plan to weight and balance to performance. Even if you're flying jets, they even have specialized jet performance charts there. It's outstanding. So if you haven't applied for that free ForeFlight military version, apply for it.
Yeah, you do have to be a current CAP VFR rated pilot, or you can be a cadet that is currently going through flight training, whether that's in CAP or outside of CAP. There is information available on the CAP website for that. All right. Does anybody have any pet peeves when flying? Let's say you're flying right seat and you see some other pilot do something that just really bothers you. What is that?
Yeah, I'll go with some. My biggest pet peeve so far throughout my career has been dealing with other pilots, crew compliments and stuff, where they have what we call tech procedures. It's a technique that they do, but they apply it as a procedure. And in the early days of the Dornier, it was a lot of young guys and they didn't interfly a lot. So we had a lot of tech procedure where as a new co-pilot, you had to learn what your aircraft commander on that day wanted you to do and how to run the checklist, even though that wasn't the procedure, that wasn't like an actual like rule that you had to follow. So I've kind of learned from that, and now when I fly with the new guy, I'm like, hey, if you have a different technique and it's working, go for it, whether it's mine or not. If it's not working, I'll try to teach you mine. If that doesn't work, I'll try to teach you what I've seen other guys do. So don't get set in your ways and think that it can only be accomplished one way. There's a lot of different ways to fly an aircraft.
Anybody else have any other pet peeves?
I mean, besides any traffic, please advise.
Oh, yeah. My personal one is on the upwind leg. It's a departure leg. It's not an upwind leg. Major McCall, what about you?
I was actually going to say literally exactly what Chris said. Going from the KC-10, you work your way up to instructor, and then when you go to the C-40, you go back down to being a co-pilot again. And yep. And so I kind of make it my goal as an instructor. I will tell you what the book says you have to do or way you have to do it. And then I'll give you the way I like to do it, the way I've seen other guys do it. You can pick which way you want to do it. Doesn't matter to me. As long as you're not busting a regulation, you can figure it out. And like in the 737 with the autopilot, there's about 4 different ways to make the airplane descend. So it's like, I let you pick which one you want and go with it from there. But yeah, Chris literally said pretty much exactly what I was going to say. So.
All right. Okay, here's another toss-up for the whole group. Moving maps, north up or track up?
I prefer track up. It's what you're seeing out the window. You don't have to reinterpret what the map is showing you to what your eyeballs are showing you out the window. That's my personal preference. Have the map doing the same thing the airplane's doing.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dan there. I think that's all of my cadet flight students. I've got 7 of them that have all soloed. And they, when we get in an airplane and someone has reset it to north up, it just drives me crazy. They all know that. So now I think before I come out and fly, they all set it to north up. I think Lucas Orr may have submitted that question, one of my cadets.
No, this is one of my questions because I got a
Okay.
buddy of mine who's a navigator on a C-130, so he always flies north up, and he and I always go back and forth.
My brain can't comprehend that.
If you're talking about Pete Parbell, he's wrong. It's flying track up, planning north up.
Hey, I was not going to drop any names. All right. I am going to share my screen here for a second and make sure it comes up. All right. So this is some general aviation statistics that are provided by the NTSB on their general aviation dashboard. The black line is accident rate in general aviation by calendar year, and you can see that there's a steady decline. However, the fatality rate seems to continue to be a pretty flat line. And then this report further goes on to kind of break it out by the phases of flight. So the biggest bar that we've got here as far as number of incidents is landing, but it's got the fewest fatalities. And then we have maneuvering and en route don't have as many incidents, but they seem to have a lot more fatal incidents. So what can we do as a pilot community to try to reduce these numbers and help improve safety?
Well, I'd like to chime in on that. That landing bar really jumps out. Don't get it in your head that you have to land, you have to grease it on. I think a good sign of good judgment with a pilot is going around. It's not what you intend to do, you tend to land. But Don't worry about looking bad. If things aren't working out on the landing, just go around, try it again. I think that would make a big difference on that graph on the landing category.
I think as technology is advanced, the aircraft get better. You know, it helps you with your situational awareness more, which is why we're seeing the trends of accidents go down. But we see more fatalities in your cruise kind of areas because we get complacent. You know, the saying is you're fat, dumb, and happy up at altitude. And that's a tough thing to beat. I've had both. I know in the U-28, which is a civilian PC-12 that we flew, it's single engine. So in the community, we just kind of made it this standard thing of, hey, if we lost the engine right now, where are we going? So if you're kind of fat, dumb, and happy, you're not really chit-chatting much, you could kind of initiate that and be like, where do you think we'd land if we lost the engine right now? And you'd kind of play it out. So you're like, oh, that field, and you'd get on ForeFlight and you'd look, well, that field's 60 miles away at our altitude. You know, we wouldn't be able to glide to it. We'd end up in this river here. And that just keeps the mind active. It kind of always re-engages you to the flight and thinking about what you could do. Because usually at altitude, people will crash, and it's more fatal because they've either overestimated what they can do, or they've just not given it much thought, so they don't know what to do. And they'll fixate on one problem without looking out the window and realizing, hey, that ground's coming up really quickly. Maybe I should stop looking at, you know, what famous example is I forget the aircraft, but it's an airliner that crashed in the swamp because they're fixated on a landing light. Had they stepped back
Eastern
and not
Airlines,
looked at
I
a
think it
landing
was.
light, they would have realized the autopilot got kicked off and we're 100 feet off the ground. So kind of taking that step back and always critically thinking, don't get hyper focused.
As a result of that crash, by the way, that they changed CRM forever. And as you know now, those of you who are airline pilots, one person that's always flying the airplane and the other crew member or crew members are dealing with the emergency. Never are all three to be immersed in the landing gear light bulb being out in case of Eastern Airlines, Lucky 1011 in the Everglades down there. That was a real tragedy.
I'd like to piggyback on what you just said. I was a co-pilot on the DC-10. We were flying from San Francisco to Hawaii, and there was a problem with the flight engineer's panel. All the lights were on. They stayed on. The captain was flying the airplane. We were cruising. We were on autopilot. And so he turned around and started interacting with the flight engineer. And he got up out of his seat and went back and started trying to figure out what was going on in the flight engineer's panel. And this was well into CRM. And I had to turn around to tag on to what you just said, Jack. I said, who's flying the airplane? Oh, yeah, Dan, take the controls. You fly while I work on this. It's not hard to do. You can have an issue come up. And like other people have mentioned, it will divert your attention. You'll get tunnel vision, and you'll forget the most important thing is always, even if you're on fire, fly the airplane first.
Yeah, there was actually one of the new C5s that had just been modified with the new engines, the C5M. At Dover, they had a problem with one of the engines. They had 3 instructor pilots on board, and they still proceeded to allow the airplane to settle and land short of the runway, like about 3 miles short of the runway, while they were fixated on this one engine.
All right. So what would you consider your most, I think I phrased this as most important non-flying member of a aviation related industry, or somebody who's not a pilot but is still involved in aviation?
I'd say my mechanics. Yeah, I break them, they fix them. So they're I can't. I mean, I know I can't fix them, and I definitely break them. So, yeah.
That's a good comment. We do a lot of ACE talks, aviation career education to middle schoolers. And not all of those seventh, eighth graders are interested in being pilots. So they're interested in, well, what are some non-pilot jobs in the military? And of course, you guys are much better qualified to answer this question. But one of, and what Adamo just said there, I would say if I couldn't be a pilot, I would want to be a crew chief. The crew chief owns that airplane. He takes care of it as if he personally owns it. And then when the pilot comes out, he interacts with the commander, the pilot in command, and they have this little dialogue as the airplane ready to go. And he says, yes, sir, salutes him. And he knows that airplane is the best it could possibly be. So I would think being a crew chief would be a prideful job as a non-pilot.
I'm somewhat of an adrenaline junkie, but I would recommend it. You know, guys consider being an air battle manager, you know, and one of our weapons controllers that actually organizes and runs a fight. You've got the big picture, you know, from an air combat perspective, you know, and you're the ones that's orchestrating, you know, strikers, the air superiority aircraft, the tankers, and so forth. You know, so if you want to be in a controlling situation where you're making things happen, that is a great job to have.
Here's a good question. Describe a situation where you made the decision not to fly, and how did you come about making that decision? You know,
I had a situation when I was a airline pilot. I think I was in Memphis and taxied out. There was about a dozen airplanes waiting to take off, and a really bad thunderstorm was bearing down on the field and kept getting closer and closer, and it was raining. And finally, you know, you're always kind of in the mode of go, go, go. Finally, I called the tower and I said, this, whatever the call sign was, I think I'm going to wait till this thunderstorm passes by. And I said, hey, me too, me too, me too. All of a sudden, everybody else said, nobody wants to be the first one to pull the plug or say, I don't want to go fly. This is too scary. And so that's something that sticks out in my mind. As soon as one person did it, then everybody else said, yeah, you know what? I think that's a great idea. I think I'll wait till this line of thunderstorms passes by.
Yeah, I had a situation in going through U-28 training. I'd been aircraft commander of the Dornier for a while. Had 3,000 hours. So I was going through training with a whole bunch of younger, you know, straight out of UPT pilots. And we were flying, usually in initial phase, you flew with contractors, and they were pretty risk adverse. But happened, we were doing an NVG line, so night vision line at night in Florida. And for the past 2 weeks, you know, fog rolls in and we get 100-foot forward visibility, which you can't fly the U-28 in. But we were flying with two of the active duty guys, and they were like, no, we want to go fly. We want to go fly. You know, the weather says that it's going to be VFR in Jacksonville. So we're going to go fly over to Jacksonville. And I was like, yeah, man, I don't know if you've seen the weather every night. I was like, they say that. And the biggest liar in the Air Force is the weather services guy in my experience. But I was like, this fog rolls around right around 6:30. We're going to take off at 6. This fog's going to roll in, and we're going to divert to Pensacola. And I don't feel like spending the night in Pensacola tonight. But they wanted to go. And finally, I had to put my foot down. I was like, nope, I'm not doing it. I'm going to overrun myself out. If you guys want to go fly, but I'm not doing it. And then the two other students kind of quipped up. They said, nobody wants to be the first guy. And then once the first guy says it, the other students were like, yeah, actually, we agree with Chris. We don't want to go up. So eventually what happened, the two instructors went up themselves. And 30 minutes later, the fog rolled in and they diverted Pensacola, and they were standing in the commander's office explaining themselves. So sometimes it's just being that first guy and sticking to your gut and your guns.
All right, I'm going to direct this question at Cadet Lieutenant Van Horn, or Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Van Horn. Why should cadets consider getting into aviation?
Wow, that's a very large question. Why should they consider getting into aviation? I think, first of all, if it's something you enjoy, I think someone mentioned this earlier, but if it's something you enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life, right? Maybe even if you're not interested in flying as a career, there's definitely a lot of other jobs in aviation, maintenance, controller, dispatch that pay really well and are in high demand that could definitely be of interest to you.
All right. I think we mentioned this briefly that this is a really good time to get to be a pilot because there's still a shortage and they can't get people out fast enough. How do we fix that?
I'll tell you how they can fix it, and they're moving in this direction right now. Someone had mentioned that the ATP requires 1,500 hours. There are some situations that reduce that number all the way down to 750 hours, but and that's the military route, by the way. They will accept you out of the military with 750 versus 1,500. Universities in between 1,000, 1,200, depending on the course that you graduate in. But one of the things that you need to do is to, like we had said earlier, is to try to get through those ratings quickly and make application. And I think it was Blake who said he's in that process right now. Don't waste any time, Blake. You need to, with your background and experience, they're going to snatch you up right away. You just need to get those applications in as soon as possible. You're probably on the top line of qualified candidates. They always love military. There's no better training, I don't think, than in the military. It's changed a lot since I went in 1968. The universities now have full motion simulators. Some of them do, and the technologies that the universities have almost match some of the training you get in the military. But don't waste any time applying, Blake. Get with it.
All right. Major McCall, any response to that? Sounds like you're behind the schedule here.
No, he's absolutely right. And yeah, I gotta hit submit on the apps here in a couple weeks, just making sure I get all my ducks in a row. But yeah, it's definitely now's never been a better time to do it. And I think there's always, it seems to me like kind of with the pilot problem, what I've seen definitely in the Air Force and some of the corporate gigs I've been applying for is that they don't have a lack of applicants, but definitely a lack of instructors and sim time and sim slots and everything like that. The corporate gig I was applying for, they do recurrent training every year. And when they called to schedule a sim slot, they couldn't get a sim slot till like late 2024. And they're like, well, that's not going to work for us. We need a sim slot next year. And most of the pilot training bases now are kind of at capacity, and it's just, they need more instructors to be able to teach it, more airplanes, more simulators. But yeah, it definitely no better time to get into it than now, for sure.
One piece of advice I'll give you, Blake, too, is I don't know if you have one specific airline that you would like to fly with or not, but you can look at the demographics and see not all airlines have the same retirement rate, but you can get that information online and find out which airlines are going to have the most airlines in the shortest period of time. Again, that reflects on getting the number and moving up quickly. I've been told or read in some of the aviation magazines that some of the major airlines, I forget, I'm not going to guess, but upgrading a captain in 2.5 to 3 years. That's unheard of. So it's unbelievable.
I can tell you right now, actually, it's faster. United makes you be off probation, which is 1 year. We have unfilled captain vacancy slots. So as long as you're off probation, you can be a captain. Delta had 2 pilots that were hired within the last 6 months, bid for and received 757 captain ratings. So they're going to be, yep, here at Delta just awarded that. So it's a weird time as far as how to fix this shortage. I think it's an industry thing. The Air Force versus commercial is 2 very different problems. The Air Force doesn't let their pilots just be pilots. So 90% of your job usually as a pilot, and Blake, I'm sure you can, you feel this as well. 90% of my job in the military was not to be a pilot. It was to work a desk. And that's an issue because you got guys who just want to fly. They leave for the airlines and the airlines need them. So they're like, yeah, just come in, work 12, 13, 14 days out of the month. You show up, fly the aircraft, land the aircraft, go home. For the airline industry, I think it's been a mix of bad pay to start out. You go $200,000 in debt and then you work for $30,000, $35,000 a year. The industry's fixing that. The pay scales are definitely going up with regionals actually making more right now than I am on year 1 at United, which is completely different to what it's always been. The other way that I think they're going to fix the pilot shortage thing is, the diversity routes that they've been going, doing more outreach for women and minority pilots. Airline pilots, and especially the military, has been the same. It's kind of been considered a rich white guy club. You need the money to get doing it. And when you look at it, they're kind of all the same personalities, which is what they've hired into. And the airlines are taking a bigger sweep at this and saying, hey, our pool is just not what it needs to be. And they're realizing that they need to start hiring everybody. And I think that's a good thing because it brings new perspectives to the industry. And it's a better, look for everything going forward.
And interesting, one of the things Boeing is doing, for instance, now, Boeing employees can get significant financial compensation for pursuing pilot ratings and additional ratings. And I've got members in my squadron that, if they pass their private pilot check right, the Boeing will pay them $10,000. They pass an instructor rating, another $10,000. So, that's another way to grow the population. If you want to, right out of school, or you just want to go work for Boeing, make a decent salary, and oh, by the way, get your flight training paid for. That's one way to do it.
Sounds like I'm on the wrong side of the state here.
Well, that's why one reason why my squadron is now up to 66 members.
Yep. All right. Here's a CAP specific one. What are some ideas to try to recruit and try to keep pilots in CAP?
I think if you cut down on the layers of paperwork involved, that would be a big help. It's just a lot of red tape to fly a CAP airplane.
Yeah, that plus get them trained into, roles where they feel they're definitely contributing, as a mission pilot and orientation pilot, as quickly as we can, so they can see the value that they're giving to the squadron as well as what they're getting from it.
I'd like to tag on to what Chuck just said. I've been a civilian pilot, I've been an Air Force pilot, I've been an airline pilot, and I've been a CAP pilot for, 7 years now. And I see CAP moving more toward a mindset that it's active duty Air Force. It's not. It's a volunteer organization that's under the umbrella of the Air Force. I'd like CAP to strike a good balance between rules, regulations, which I'm 100% for, and understanding that if you make the job of being a CAP pilot too bureaucratic and too militaristic and too much paperwork, like Chuck said, they're going to leave. It's a volunteer organization. And if the organization doesn't treat the members in a way that they want to stay, of course they're going to leave. That's something I like to see change, kind of strike a balance between the way it used to be and the way it seems to be moving.
All right. How has technology, mainly like avionics, changed how you fly these days?
That's a huge change, as you know. Again, being probably the oldest panel member, I soloed a J3 Cub, had maybe 4 instruments, altimeter, airspeed, oil pressure, and a inclinometer there. And we go all the way up to this panel that's behind me in the background here, the G1000, which kind of mimics what the airlines have. But it's huge change. And it's a huge safety device that we have. There's so much information available to the pilot on the flight deck today using ForeFlight and G1000 and beyond airline equipment. It's amazing. I know when I was, I don't know if Cadet Van Horn has ever had to be worried about a student on a first solo cross country coming back or not. But in the 1960s, I was 19 years old, and I remember sending a couple of solo students out on their first solo, and they didn't have any moving map or anything. They just had paper chart and pencil, and we're a little concerned that they might get turned around out in that area, or even going to the practice area and coming back on a solo was a little bit of a concern. Nowadays, if you get lost in a G1000, there's something wrong with you. But the technology has changed. It's much safer, much easier. We can become too reliant on that. We need to begin to think, and it's been said multiple times already, too much heads down, too much time in the cockpit. Need to always stress, let's be looking out. It's okay to peek inside, but look outside.
How do you maintain proficiency? How often do you fly?
My goal is to fly at least once a week, but obviously Katie is as a CFI is probably flying a lot more than that.
Yeah, I'd say this is a good question because a lot of times, you get your private pilot certificate. If you're not planning on getting additional ratings, what do you do now, right? Are you renting, finding a flight club? And I dealt with this back a couple years ago, but it's really good. Like Colonel Monmouth said, flying every week, because it's a skill that does degrade over time. And it's a lot harder to get proficient than it is to stay proficient. So having a game plan as to how you're going to do that, I think, is really important.
All right. Does anybody have any there I was stories?
That they will admit.
All right, I'll be the first to go. Back when I was young, dumb, and invincible in the Air Force, I was flying from Florida to Phoenix, Arizona. It was 3 legs, and each one of them was maximum length leg. And so if I didn't make the first leg, if I landed short, that was it. I wasn't, because you could only do 3 legs. And the first base I was going to land at was having very bad weather. And I fell into the common trap of get there-itis, where you put getting there ahead of safety. And so I descended from 30,000 feet, was in the clouds, in the weather, in the rain, in the turbulence the whole way down, and just kept going. Actually got to the point where I was so low on fuel I couldn't divert to my divert airport, so I was committed. And then I find out that there's a tornado a couple miles from the base. It was either eject or land. That was it. I got kicked around all the way down. I saw like 1 or 2 flashes of the approach light system, then slammed into the runway. Luckily, I was on center line. One of the dumbest things I've ever done. But I fell into all the common traps that pilots fall into. If you don't die from your mistakes, you'll learn a lot. So I've never done that again. That was probably my hairiest moment.
As Colonel Stone said, anybody else wants to admit anything?
Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. I had a case at Nellis when I was flying a two-ship of F-15s, leading a two-ship F-15s against a couple of F-16s on a radar test sortie. And because my airplane was the only one that was ready at step time for the two Eagles, I let my commander, the colonel, fly it, and I jumped to the spare, met him at end of runway. As we entered the range, the F-16s right in front of us, we do what's called a G warm-up exercise, where you spread out to about a mile or so, line abreast. You do a 180-degree turn at 4 Gs. You accelerate, and you do another 180-degree turn at 6 Gs. You know, kind of like runners stretching before a race. Well, as I call for the first 180-degree turn, I look over at my wingman, and he's got a fireball streaming behind his airplane. That's unusual. So we call knock it off, but then he turns away from me and starts doing a slow barrel roll. So I lock up his airplane with my radar, and I still look at his altitude. We started this at 23,000 feet, and he proceeds to do about 7 slow barrel rolls. And as I closed about a half mile away, I'm talking to him on the radio, say, hey, you're on fire. It's not just a stagnation, you know, an engine malfunction, because I can see fire moving up the tail of the airplane. So I call for him to eject. It's heading 14,000 feet, which is our minimum out of control altitude. He does that, and the airplane immediately goes into a flat spin, full of gas. It hits the ground, you know, immediately below him, 10,000 feet below him, and makes a huge fireball. Luckily, he lands about a half a mile away. The lucky thing was I was going to fly that airplane that day, you know, except the other airplane wasn't ready on time. The key lessons learned there was, you know, he maintained, you know, he flew the airplane as best he could. Turns out it had thrown a compressor blade, which had severed a main fuel line, severed a flight control cable, and it's what caused the airplane to be uncontrollable. Obviously, the fuel lines made it unrecoverable as well. But you know, we learned a lot about, hey, the life support shops now started doing as great a job of maintenance as they should, because his 4-line release, which allowed him to allow the parachute to come down stable instead of, you know, oscillating, that didn't work. His survival radio didn't work. He couldn't talk to me after he got on the ground. You know, a helicopter went up, picked him up, and he was, you know, about a half inch shorter for a little while, but, you know, came out of it just fine. But, you know, like I said, sometimes better to be lucky than good.
All right. What would you have done differently over the course of your career, knowing what you know now?
Not a thing.
All right. Somewhat related then. If you weren't a pilot, what do you think you'd be doing these days?
My backup to being a pilot in college was to be an actuary. So, yeah, it's weird.
I entered college as a architectural engineering student, and about my sophomore year is when I got the bug to fly, and so I guess if I didn't fly, I probably would have continued pursuing architectural engineering. I did not get my degree in that. I got it actually in a industrial management program. So anyway.
All right. For the airline pilots, you know, I'm sure you've had to fly back and coach every once in a while. Do you ever critique the pilot up front?
I think we talked
Of
about.
course we do.
Yeah, all
Of course
the time.
we do.
Yeah, I'm a white knuckle flyer when I'm in the coach, but more so is in the back seat of a cap airplane when we've got 2 cap pilots up there. If I can't reach the controls, I'm not a happy camper. So I try not to back fly or tell them how to fly, but in the event of an emergency, I would sure like to be sitting in the front seat where I can get my hands on the controls.
We have somebody else with a comment on that?
Yeah, I critique the landing, but I'll never say anything to the guy probably because you don't know half the time you don't know what the conditions are. And I've had passengers come up and like, oh man, it was a terrible landing. And I just want to look at it and be like, yeah, man, you're lucky we're here. It's like a 35 knot crosswind. There's a storm rolling in. Like, I don't control the bumps in the sky. There's nothing I can do as a pilot to avoid turbulence, really. And then there's other times where they're like, oh man, that was a good landing. Thanks for getting us here. And I was like, man, I pranged that thing in. I cut power at 50 feet. Like, it was all me.
Well, Captain Nodamo is the most recent entry into the corporate world of aviation. Could you kind of give us kind of your timeline, how things worked, how you kind of got into United, and any guidance you can give anybody else considering it?
Yeah, I'd say right now that it is ripe for the picking to get in. I applied to a lot of different ones. I left active duty in January 1st of 21, so still kind of in COVID, not anticipating hiring to come back the way that it did and as quickly as it did. My biggest advice is it's a race. Get your hours, get your ATP, get hired. To any military guys looking to get out, just hit the submit button. You can refine your application as you go. But I've had friends who took that advice, submitted a half complete application, and they got a call to get hired. And then I've got friends who took a year perfecting their application before they submitted the application, and now they're a year behind what they could have been. For going a civilian route, again, it's a race. Get your hours, get hired. Nobody knows when this bubble will pop and hiring will go back to normal. But for now, I'd say hurry up and get it. If anybody has questions, like more detailed on the process, feel free to email me, text, whatever. I love helping guys get hired. So, yeah, if you have more detailed questions, I can always answer those.
Cadet Van Horn, just let me know. She's got to leave here in a few minutes. So, Miss Van Horn, do you have any parting thoughts or last minute advice, something before we say goodbye to you?
Not really. I'm gonna shamelessly plug my flight school, Summit Aviation, at the Lee Summit Airport. So give me a call or an email. I'll drop my information in the chat if you are interested in flight training. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, before she goes, Sam,
Yep.
If she would private message me, email me, or text me, I have some really good advice. I know she's headed for a corporate job, Embraer. I've got some specific information I think she needs to know. So in the chat, I'll leave my email and phone number. Give me a call or text or chat, and I'll share that information with you. I think you'll be happy you did.
All right. So I think everybody else that's remaining on the panel is military. So how did you get started flying in the military? I think we heard some ROTC stories. Any other paths into military aviation?
Yeah, I would say that the most sure way of getting into military aviation is to go to the Air Force Academy. If you have the academics and the leadership background and you're interested in doing it, it's a phenomenal school to be from. Not necessarily the most fun while you're there because they work you hard, but the academy is one, it's a fully paid education. Two, you'll get flight training while you're there. I've got private pilots and gliders when I went through the academy. And then, the academy grads, because the Air Force has invested so much money in getting them through their college degree, have priority in getting through pilot training as well, at least getting into pilot training. Once you're there, you compete with everybody else. But that is the surest path to getting a flight school slot in the Air Force.
Yeah, one route that's not thought of, I think, is National Guard or Reserves. Usually, the route that those guys take is they'll enlist with the unit, and then the unit likes them. They'll move to a aircrew position, and then eventually they can get a pilot slot, UPT slot. If I could go back and do it again, I knew the guard and I had the ins, I'd probably go that route versus active duty. But otherwise, your greatest, most likely route is RTC or the academy. Academy gets priority on the slots. When I did RTC, they said, "Hey, we have however many pilot slots, 200, let's say, this year." The academy got 51% of those slots. So they drew a line, and 51% of those slots went to the academy, and then the rest went to OTS, went to active like RTC guys, went to current Air Force officers that were trying for UPT. So you can imagine the pools there are not the best at getting that. I think my RTC class, we had 9 guys go up for it. And surprisingly, 8 of us got it. But I think that had more to do with our commander at the time had scored a NATO air-to-air kill in F-16s, so he had a lot of say and had turned down a 1-star slot. I had a buddy that was flying at Embry-Riddle. They had like 60 guys put in for it, and 3 guys got their pilot slot in their ROTC class. So those rates change every year. The Air Force needs people right now, but next year they could say, "Hey, we don't need pilots," and then you go from 20 potential slots to 2 potential slots. So, yeah.
Another thing I'll add with the Guard and Reserve stuff is I've noticed some people think, oh, that's a part-time job, and even if I get hired, I got to go find a full-time job somewhere. There are actually full-time positions available within Guard and Reserve units. So there is traditional Guard or Reservist, which is the guys that show up 1 weekend a month, have another full-time job. Then you have active Guard Reserve, which is basically you're just like an active duty pilot, but in the Guard and Reserve. So that's your full-time job for, 3-4 years. And then you can go back to either being a traditional guardsman or something else. And then there's also an Air Reserve technician, which is, think of it as like a hourly paid job, still full-time, but the only difference between that and AGR is you can kind of quit. You can give a 2 weeks notice and leave if you want to. And then some of the benefits between ART and AGR are a little different as well, and whether they count towards a retirement or not. But yeah, don't think just if you join the Guard or Reserve, you still got to find another full-time job. You can make it a full-time job if you want to.
Mhm. And I guess I've got a question directed to me. Can I comment on CAP's instructor pilot program or training program? I am actually a beneficiary of that program. I didn't do the full version that they offer. It's currently administered by national headquarters, so there's not a public click here to apply type of link. What they do is they look into the wings, pilots, look at anybody who's got a commercial rating at a minimum, see how much they fly, see how much they've already kind of contributed to CAP, and then they kind of reach out and say, "Hey, are you interested in getting your CFI?" What they do is they sign you up for a I think it's a 142 program down in Denton, Texas, with U.S. Aviation Academy. So their goal is that it's an in residence, get down there, fly for 3-4 weeks, get your CFI out of the way, and then you have some give back that you have to do to CAP in terms of participating in flight academies or teaching cadets and other things like that. So it is there. It's CAP's way of trying to trying to improve the CFI recruitment by recruiting from within, because we've already got dedicated pilots who spend the time, the effort. They're volunteers, like Captain Stratman mentioned, and so if you've already demonstrated that you're willing to donate that, all right, let's help you get something that would benefit you, but also hopefully benefit CAP in the long run. I don't have any details of how many students they go at any given time. When I did it, I think there was about maybe 10 all around the country. So they do try to spread the wealth out just a little bit. But ultimately, the big thing is, how do I get into it? It's just do what you're flying. What you're doing now in national, if they pick you, we'll get a hold of you. The course, I think it was about 3 weeks is what their ideal, you come in and get done. It's one of those accelerated programs for the CFI, which, again, somewhat depends on weather and whatever else you run into. And yes, it is all funded, transport, residency, the flight, so it's a pretty big investment on Civil Air Patrol side. All right. What is the most rewarding thing that you've done with your flying career so far?
Well, for me recently, it's been to solo these 7 cadets down here in the Branson area there. I did that as a 19-year-old like Katie. I enjoyed it then, and it's still a thrill today to see the smiles on their face when they get out of the airplane. I still enjoy cutting their shirt tails off, and it's just nothing like it. If you like instructing, and like I said, I was one of those nerdy 19-year-olds that really enjoyed teaching, and I still do.
I think, let's see, some of the stuff, I never really thought of it when I joined the Air Force, but being in the tanker force, you tend to move a lot of stuff. Occasionally we'll fuel the Marine, like presidential V-22 Ospreys across the ocean. And it was kind of neat being in a restaurant day later, and you see President Trump on the screen talking, and you see 8 MV-22s behind him, and I'm like, oh, I took him over there. And my girlfriend's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah. And definitely kind of humbling stuff. I've been in other countries, and we'll find some Americans, and they're like, oh, you guys are here for training or something. Like, how'd you guys get here? And we're like, well, we flew the airplane over here. And they were like, you two? We're like, yeah. They're like, you two are a couple 26-year-old kids, and they let you just take an airplane and, go across the ocean. We're like, yeah, we do it all the time. So, yeah, definitely cool experiences.
One of the thoughts I had there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, Blake, we get that all the time. I was 23 when I started, and some grandma would be boarding and look in the cockpit, and I remember one of them saying, "Does your mother know where you are?" Because I look so young. But the comment that Blake made there about being 26 years old, just think back during World War II, those guys that were flying the B-17s and the B-29s, they were probably younger than you, Blake. Can you imagine that?
Yep.
Amazing, just amazing.
All right, we are down to our last 5 minutes, so I'm going to go through all the panelists, and like I asked Cadet Van Horn, if you got any parting thoughts, any last minute advice. Colonel Stone, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm nearing the end of my tenure here, just because I'm aging out. There's always a time when you got to pull the eject button and get out, and I can feel that coming near as I age up and out here. But I've really enjoyed it. But my big concern is, who are we going to backfill with? So my question to you about being a CFI, I commend you for taking the time to go to Denton and becoming a CAP CFI. But I see, just again, looking at the numbers, within the Missouri wing, we're going to be in a desperate situation here in the next few years unless we need another dozen CFIs here in the next 2 years.
I
If it-
will definitely agree with that. And our biggest problem is kind of geography sometimes. So Colonel Monteith's doing a great job recruiting over there on the east side of the wing. We just need to get some of them to move.
Do you see? Someone asked me, what do we need to do in order to get the CFIs to come and volunteer their time? If you have a full-time job and you're working, I don't see that happening. The people may be able to give a little bit of their time on the weekends, but for me, I'm retired. I'm available 24/7. However, I think one of the incentives that came up just this last week, do you ever see a time when National might provide some income for a CAP CFI? Will that ever happen?
I have no idea. I think part of the history of CAP has been based on the fact that we are a volunteer service.
Yeah.
But I think they recognize that it is very, very difficult for us to compete with somebody that flies for a flight school.
Yeah.
They're making money out there, especially if their goal is to get into the airlines. They want as many hours a week as they can get, and I'm getting paid for that. Great. Which is why it's always amazing that we are able to do what we are able to do with our dedicated group of volunteers. I was especially proud last fiscal year. Missouri Wing flew the most per aircraft of all of North Central region.
Yeah.
And that includes Minnesota, which usually, they've got 22 aircraft. They've got a ton of pilots, but we beat them. Not that it's a competition. It just means that, we've got those dedicated volunteers. But now CAP's goal is to fly 200 hours per aircraft, and we got over that. We were over 200 hours in aircraft. So, but yeah, our instructor numbers are not high by any means. And we definitely, one of the sayings that I've started to say here recently is I don't need 100% of any one pilot's time. I need 10% of 10 pilots' time. That's the way that I'm going to need to try to fix this. So to all the squadrons out there, just kind of keep talking to the pilots. Even if we can't get them to fly, if we get one instructor who flies with one new pilot and gets them onboarded, that's two new pilots that we didn't have before. Let's try to at least do that, chip away at this. Hopefully National will do their part. They're starting to, I think, with the CFI program, but again, it's not quick. And just to correct you, I didn't go to Denton because I was already in the middle of my CFI training under Part 61, so I finished it up here in Kansas City, but it was still under the program at the end of the day. All right, Major McCall, your final thoughts.
Let's see. I was thinking of something to plug in there, and I forgot the original question you asked. But anyone I'd say that wants to do it, obviously stick with it and do it. One question I saw in the chat was that didn't really get answered was if we fly for CAP and what we do. I do. I started March of last year or May of last year, and made it up through instructor, mission scanner, and I actually went down to NISA, which is in Columbus, Indiana, and did the mission observer and mission pilot stuff. So anyone that wants to do the mission pilot stuff, that's a quick 5-day course in knocking out the mission observer and mission pilot stuff all in 5 days. I think it was like $200, and that covers your lodging, and all the flying's free down there as well. That's coming up in June, and I think registration opens towards the end of February. So if you're thinking about wanting to do that, you can find my email on e-services, and just give me a shout. I went through and did it, loved it, and I can help you out with that. We kind of talked about retention stuff, and as Chuck was talking, I kind of thought, I don't know if we've ever thought of doing kind of like the group O-rides where, you go out and fly 9-10 cadets in a day's time. Have we ever thought of, getting new pilots that need onboarded, coming up with a weekend, a Saturday as a primary and a Sunday as a rain day, and just sending an instructor and maybe a check pilot with a plane and, knocking through most of those onboarding rides, and if they're ready by the end of the day, do a Form 5? Or has there ever been any thought about doing that?
We did do that, I think about a year and a half ago down in Joplin. Lieutenant Colonel Veach would typically kind of take the lead on planning stuff like that. So yes, we do definitely try to do that. There is ground school that we have to do, so we have done virtual ground schools as bigger groups. Where we seem to struggle in terms of effectiveness is G1000 training. You know, a day with 2 or 3 flights is usually not enough for somebody who's never touched it before. So that doesn't mean that's not an approach we want to continue to take. It just means that it's not one weekend. It's let's plan on a couple. We are also starting to try to pair up, or I'm reaching out to new pilots as squadrons make me aware of them. That they just joined the squadron, to try to ensure they're making progress. Get them in touch with an instructor, get them working on some ground school, get them trained up for WIMMERS, and get their documents uploaded so that it's not just the squadrons having to work on them by themselves, especially for the ones that don't have pilots or don't have instructors in them. So we're trying as a wing to come in as more of a resource, and then let's try to help you get to where you want to go. You've taken the first step. You've joined CAP. Let's see what we can do. And NISA is a great plug there for the mission qualifications. Something that we probably don't have enough people go through and do, because they are then able to bring that standardized training back to Missouri Wing, where they can then disperse that information. So thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah.
Captain Damu, any final thoughts?
I would just say, stick with it. If you want to be a pilot, if you want to fly in whatever capacity, the resources are out there. I think CAP's a great resource filled with, as we've seen today, a wide variance of experience. So try to use those resources and gain as much knowledge as you can.
And finally, Lieutenant Colonel Monteith.
Biggest thing I would say is thank you to all the volunteers that really give out your time and effort to making this a great organization, because we can't do it without you, and recognize that it is taking a lot of time. So just really appreciate everybody joining up and giving of your time and efforts and your capabilities to make it effective. I have a somewhat selfish reason for wanting to be members of CAP, because if I should ever need your services, I want the most qualified crew out there to find me as quickly as they can. So,
well, being the adrenaline junkie that you have self-professed several times, you're probably the most likely to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I've got just past 1,100 hours. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for joining us today. We definitely could not have put this on without you all, so I greatly appreciate everybody's participation. Appreciate everybody who joined us for this. Hopefully it was educational, informative. I will be sending out a survey to everybody to see what we did. More importantly, do we want to do this again? I always enjoy hangar talks, and I like to talk to pilots and learn from them, and I think it was mentioned a couple of times, learn from other people's mistakes. So it's always a good thing to do there. So with that, thank you again to everybody. Thank you for all the panelists. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Van Horn, who had to leave, and also thanks to Cadet Colonel Hess, who was not able to make it, which puts her at the front of the list for the next panel. We are going to do this. But everybody, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And if I could have the panelists stick around for just a little bit longer, everybody else can drop off. Thank you.